All right. I just love doing this. It makes me feel so powerful. Well, good morning, everybody. Hope you all had a good weekend. And let me start this morning by reminding you of Democrats' crazy spending spree for nearly 4 years. And I'm just going to give you a couple facts. These aren't opinions. These are actual facts. $22 billion from Biden's HHS to provide free housing and cars for illegals, right? We don't have any homeless vets that need housing or cars. We'll give that $22 billion to the illegals. Okay, $45 million for DEI scholarships in Burma. Probably would like to have some American students that would like those scholarships, but we'll give those to DEI scholarships for people in Burma. How about $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of migrants? Now this one's really important. The Biden administration thought it was really important to spend $20 million for Sesame Street in the Middle East. Okay. $8 million, get this, $8 million to make mice transgender. Why? Well, that's a good use of taxpayer dollars, right? Ask yourself, what exactly are we doing here? The Democrats are now making sure that we spend dollars on transgender mice, to make mice transgender. I can think of some other reasons to use $8 million. Maybe the homeless, maybe some housing, maybe some veterans. No, they'll prioritize $8 million to make mice transgender. Okay. Under Biden, federal agencies handed out taxpayer dollars with weak oversight, loose control, and almost no accountability. Since his inauguration, however, President Trump and House Republicans have been taking practical, common sense steps to combat government's waste, fraud, and abuse. And this week, we're continuing to pass legislation to make sure your tax dollars are well spent and those who abuse your tax dollars are actually held accountable, because Republicans know how hard you work for those tax dollars. It should be simple. It's common sense. But I'm afraid my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have forgotten the meaning of that and that concept. Common sense says that if someone steals taxpayer dollars, they should be prosecuted. I think that makes sense. I think the average American who works really hard for those taxpayer dollars and sees somebody abuse them would like to see consequence to that action. Crazy, right? Says people trying to stop fraud, waste, and abuse are the problem. Okay. Crazy says fraudsters should be protected. Crazy says the American people's hard-earned tax dollars should be given to criminals who are stealing their money. That's crazy. I mean, just look at what's unfolding in Minnesota. Sorry, Tom. Mr. Whip, sorry about that. This is an actual real-life case. Amy Bach was the executive and co-founder and executive director of Feeding Our Future, a Minnesota nonprofit. She and her network stole $250 million intended to feed hungry children. Let me say that again. Money meant for hungry children was stolen by a fraudster who treated your taxpayer dollars like it was their own personal ATM machine. That is disgusting. And that's not a paperwork error. That's theft, and there's no way around it, period. And while Republicans are fighting to crack down on the waste, fraud, and the abuse, every single Democrat has consistently voted against legislation to protect your dollars. In fact, every single Democrat has voted to keep dumping money into these programs without oversight or review. They want to continue the abuse of waste, fraud, and abuse. Ask yourself why. Think about it. Republicans are fighting to stop fraud. That's common sense. Democrats protect fraudsters. That's crazy. Americans work too hard to watch their money go to Washington, and bureaucrats and Democrats abuse their money, their hard-earned money. And it's really easy because it's not their money, it's your money. And let me remind you of one thing that I say every single week. Even though we have waste, fraud, and abuse, and it's rampant, like the story of Amy Bach, what do the Democrats want to do? Every single Democrat voted to raise your taxes for more waste, fraud, and abuse. Gee, I wonder why. This shouldn't be complicated, folks. It's a choice between crazy and common sense. House Republicans choose common sense. And we're going to keep fighting to protect your hard-earned dollars, period. And with that, I'm proud to turn it over to my colleague from Illinois, the wonderful Mary Miller.
Thank you, Chairwoman McClain. And I want to thank Chairman Wahlberg and my colleagues on the Education and Workforce Committee for moving this package forward and my bill to stop the Child Care Scams, Stop Child Care Scams Act. House Republicans are united in ensuring child care assistance is benefiting American children and families in need, not criminals, scammers, and fraudsters. For years, states like Illinois and Minnesota have tolerated rampant abuse of taxpayer-funded programs, diverting resources away from those who need it most. That is simply unacceptable. Abusing the taxpayer, diminishing confidence in the government, and keeping the money that was intended for the most needy in our society from going to them. My bill makes accountability mandatory. States that repeatedly fail to address fraud will face consequences, and fraudsters who have been exploiting the system are officially on notice. House Republicans will continue hunting down waste, fraud, and abuse, routing out corruption, protecting every taxpayer dollar entrusted to us. The days of criminals looting government programs intended for vulnerable children and working parents are over. Shame on the Democrats. Every single one of them opposes transparency and accountability. Now, I'd like to invite Whip Emmer to the podium.
Thank you.
I knew you would do that.
Thank you. So I can get a little closer. Thanks, Mary. For years, my colleagues and I have been calling out the rampant fraud in my home state of Minnesota, from child care and autism services to meal assistance and housing. Minnesota has been ground zero for fraud in our government programs. Government programs, as has been said already this morning by Lisa, which are intended for Americans in need. Fraud is not a victimless crime. It is a blatant theft from vulnerable Americans. And let me remind everyone, Democrats like Tim Walz, Keith Ellison, and Ilhan Omar created the perfect conditions for this fraud. And then, by the way, they looked the other way while taxpayers were ripped off to the tune of billions of dollars. In contrast, Republicans are taking decisive action to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. We're going to make it much harder for fraudsters to take advantage of American generosity. This week, House Republicans are going to pass multiple bills tackling fraud head-on. We're not going to do this little frosting garbage that our Democrat candidate for governor tries to do in Minnesota. This is real stuff. First, we're going to pass a package of 8 bills to stop child care scams, like that of the Quality Leering Center. This package implements common sense state reporting requirements and stricter penalties on both states and providers that misuse federal funds for childcare. By the way, Timmy Walz could have done this years ago, but he chose not to. He chose not to, and his administration looked the other way for 7.5 years. Next, we're going to tighten the reins on the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, otherwise known as TANF. By adding safeguards, we will ensure taxpayer dollars actually go to low-income families who are trying to get back on their feet, not to fraudsters. And finally, House Republicans are going to pass the No Aid for Ghost Students Act. Believe it or not, this actually has to be passed to stop the flow of student aid to fraudsters posing as fake students. All of this is common sense, as Lisa has pointed out, and I hope that our colleagues across the aisle can at least start to agree. Make no mistake, these bills are a massive blow to greedy fraudsters like those in my state. Between the work the House Republicans are doing and President Trump's fraud task force with Vice President Vance, and despite Democrats' best efforts, taxpayers can rest assured knowing their dollars are finally going to be protected. And with that, I turn it over to our leader, Scalise.
Beep, beep. Thank you, Whip. Hold on. That was to the whip. That was not to you. That was to the whip. A direct shot. No, those of us in the boot caucus stick together. Governor Walz heard that one. Good to see all of you. And we are bringing a number of bills this week. We're bringing another appropriations bill to the floor, Agapropes. You look at what Chairman Cole and his members of the Appropriations Committee continue to do, moving bill after bill out of subcommittee, out of full committee. They've got some more subcommittee and full committee markups, but we're bringing yet another appropriations bill to the floor this week, tomorrow. Get that bill over to the Senate. Allow the Senate to start working on a normal appropriations process. It's a commitment Speaker Johnson made the day he came in. He's committed to continuing to follow through so that we don't end up with the Christmas omnibuses that seem to be a pattern around this place, a pattern that we broke. We broke it by getting back to doing the work of Congress, having these appropriations bills move through the process. We're bringing other bills too. You're seeing the NDAA being marked up in the Armed Services Committee later this week. Critical bill to our national security, to our Department of War. Chairman Rogers and his committee, I think he told me yesterday they have about 1,000 amendments filed on that bill. They will go through that process over the next few days and produce a great NDAA bill for our country's defense. And then you'll see that bill coming to the floor shortly thereafter. Surface transportation bill that's moved through 2 committees now, working on that coalition. You'll see that bill moving to the floor. But we're also bringing, as Chair McClain and Whip Emmer and Mary Miller talked about, some more bills to confront the fraud, the massive fraud that sadly occurs in this country with your taxpayer dollars. And it's not thousands or millions, it's billions of dollars that is being stolen every single year from the hardworking taxpayers of America. And House Republicans are committed to ending it, to exposing it, to giving more tools to the lawmakers, to Justice Department, to others, to root it out and send people to jail who steal your money. And why, for some reason, does every single Democrat continue to oppose every measure we bring to root out this fraud? I think it begs an important question to ask. You go back to the One Big Beautiful Bill. We put important fraud prevention measures in there. Bill wasn't just about helping give working families more of their tax dollars back. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime. These are blue-collar workers who are finally starting to get thousands of dollars back in their pocket so they can take a summer vacation, so they can invest maybe for their kids' education fund. But every Democrat voted no. And I don't think it was just because Democrats don't want Americans to have more of their hard-earned money. Democrats also knew that in that bill we had fraud prevention measures that eliminated fraud, that exposed leering centers. Sadly, everybody knows what a leering center is. It wasn't just a typo. It's theft of your money. And how much money? We're talking tens of billions. Dr. Oz estimates over $100 billion just in durable medical equipment and hospice fraud that we're working with him, and we've got actually a meeting with Dr. Oz later today to start rooting out that kind of waste. Imagine, over $100 billion just in one agency. And every Democrat stands in the way of us rooting it out. Because we're able to take that money, the savings that we get from fraud prevention, and give it back to families in the form of no tax on overtime. Senior citizens, 85% of whom no longer have to pay taxes on their Social Security. That's how much fraud was out there. And every Democrat voted no. Now, we're going to bring these 3 bills this week. Again, you look at the fraud in TANF. You'll hear the Democrats on the floor. They're going to hide behind children. And, oh, my gosh, don't take this money away. Well, Lisa told you the story. $42 million from one fraudster in Minnesota, all under the guise of helping feed children who are needy. That's what they do. They use these programs and they talk about lofty things like helping to feed children, and they steal the money from those children to put it in their pockets. Every one of them ought to go to jail. And that money ought to be returned to the taxpayers. Yes, help the people who need it, but take the money away from the fraudsters and send them to prison. That's what we're doing this week. Watch how every Democrat votes on these bills. It's going to be very, very telling. With that, bring up the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson.
Good morning, everybody. Let me just say here at the outset, it's a great day to be alive. It's a great day to be an American. There's a lot of good news. We're highlighting fraud this week. This is an anti-fraud week as our theme of legislation. But as you know, you can tell by the fervor of my colleagues who have spoken here, every day is anti-fraud day for Republicans, okay? Democrats see it differently. We'll speak about that in a moment. But let me just say, among the things you can be pleased about, happy about as being an American, we're closing in on the nation's birthday on July 4th, and all the celebrations are beginning to ramp up, and all that good feeling is out there. There's some more great news that was just delivered yesterday. And if you saw the numbers come out, many of you have reported on it, but I wanted to highlight it here this morning at the outset. Not only were tax refunds their largest in recent history, here's the key point. Contrary to Democrats' false narratives that they have tried breathlessly to hoist upon the people, okay, here's the fact. This tax season was a great boost for hardworking American families. That's exactly how we designed it, and that is what the numbers now prove that we achieved. Let me tell you what it said. In total, the U.S. Treasury gave $82 billion back to the American taxpayer. And so what that means is 70% of filers earning less than $100,000 received a big tax cut. And 96% of taxpayers who earn less than $200,000 got a big tax cut. 96% of the country. That's hardworking Americans who are struggling every day to make ends meet. We're working to make life easier for them and bring down their costs and work on affordability. This, of course, was all thanks to the Working Families Tax Cut, the big, beautiful bill that we got signed triumphantly into law last July 4th, as you all remember. Every single Democrat voted against the bill. Every single one in the House and Senate. So they can't take any credit for that. In fact, you can say rightfully that they would have prevented that great benefit for the American people. Among its many accomplishments, the Working Families Tax Cut, this consequential piece of legislation prevented the largest tax hike in American history, which would have happened by default had we not passed the bill last December. It eliminated burdensome regulations. It unleashed affordable American energy again and strengthened critical safety nets with reforms to curb fraud, waste, and abuse of the welfare programs. And that's something Americans deeply care about. After voting against tax relief for low and middle class earners, Democrats have zero credibility when it comes to their claims about wanting to help with affordability. It just doesn't wash. Now, we're talking about the war on fraud because it's a very important theme right now. It's being amplified around the country for obvious reasons because we're uncovering more and more. Hey, elections have consequences. When you put people who are against fraud and as vehemently dedicated to that as the people demand and expect. When you put Republicans in charge, we go root this stuff out, we bring it to your attention, and we eliminate it. And that's exactly what's happening. There's one thing that infuriates every conscientious American. It is the waste of their hard-earned taxpayer dollars. And so we're working on that. Explosive reports have exposed staggering and brazen fraud in deep blue states like Minnesota and California, as you've heard addressed this morning. They have industrial scale theft. I mean, it has gone on unabated for years. 83% of Americans in the latest poll say that they're concerned about fraud in government programs. And they want us to do something about it, and we are. We have been. We will continue to do. It clearly strikes a nerve with the American people. The Government Accountability Office estimates that the U.S. government loses, listen to this, loses as much as $500 billion in federal funds every year. $500 billion is burned up, wasted, because fraudsters and scammers are involved. That's $4,000 per American household every year. Totally wasted. We could use that money so much better. Why does this matter? Because fraud is an invisible tax. What that does is it weakens the buying power of every American tax dollar. And you can bet that when Democrats are in charge, they're not going to be pointing out the fraud. They're not going to point their finger at the billions and billions of dollars stolen on their watch. They're going to be looking to raise more funds. They're going to try to raise more revenue to cover the fraud. That's what their response is. They want more and bigger government. They want higher taxes. They want more spending. And they never talk about reforms. Again, they're voting against the reforms, and you're going to see that demonstrated again this week on the floor. They talk a big game about affordability, but they refuse to do anything to address the rampant fraud in the government, which makes government services more expensive for every American taxpayer. It's certainly no way to run a railroad, as we say. It's no way to run a daycare either, by the way. And Republicans in Congress are tirelessly working on this to restore accountability and get our nation's fiscal house back in order, because that's what people demand and deserve, and we're on it. You heard about just the bills that will be on the floor this week, but just remember what we've already done in the Working Families Tax Cut, just in the Big Beautiful Bill alone. We implemented new measures to prevent illegal aliens from receiving federal benefits, because guess what? That's against the law. We strengthened oversight and accountability for Medicaid and SNAP, two federal programs that were just rife with unchecked fraud. We also ensured in the Big Beautiful Bill, the Working Families Tax Cut, Medicaid rolls were cleared of ineligible recipients faster and more frequently. We required states to check working-age, able-bodied adults' eligibility twice per year instead of just once. And you know what? That's having the desired effect, saving billions and billions and billions of dollars. We also set our sights on eliminating duplicative enrollment in federal health programs, which cost taxpayers an estimated $14 billion annually. Just that line item, $14 billion annually wasted. For the first time, we conditioned Medicaid and SNAP eligibility on common sense work requirements. And so if you're an able-bodied man, for example, of working age, and you don't have young children, our bill requires you for 20 hours a week, you got to be working or do job training or school or volunteering to receive federal health benefits. And you know what? That's about a 99% public opinion issue. The single common sense provision, just that one alone, is going to save taxpayers $300 billion over the next decade. So look, we're not just talking about this, we're actually passing bills to do it. And you heard about what's on the floor this week to continue this theme. Fraud doesn't exist at the federal level only, of course. The states are the ones in so many cases that are the purveyors of federal funds for the services they administer at the state level. And so we have this trio of bills that you've heard about this week. We're going to close loopholes, crack down on abuse, hold negligent state leaders accountable. And this is what you get when you vote for good government. When Republicans are in charge, that's what we do. You've heard about some of the highlights just real quickly. We're going to put new guardrails on TANF funding, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, to mitigate improper payments and ensure states are paying their fair share for this critically important program. We're going to make sure the services get to the people who actually need and deserve it. They're not wasted and stolen by people by fraud. We're going to have additional measures to stop fraud and crime rings and so-called ghost students who are stealing federal student aid under fake or stolen identities. We're going to host a bunch of reforms that crack down on rampant abuse of child care dollars, withholding federal funds from states that repeatedly misuse them, like we saw in Minnesota, to strengthen fraud standards and state oversight. So much of that is going on. It will continue to go on. And we're going to hold these people accountable, and we're going to make sure that taxpayer dollars are spent well. Republicans are really proud of our work to address fraud, waste, and abuse in government, as you know, and we continue to go forward that. We're going to have a third reconciliation bill that comes up in the coming weeks, and you'll see further attention to it paid there. It was noted that the White House is dialed in on this 100%. The president has appointed someone as high as the vice president. So Vice President Vance is working on this as well. We're working alongside and in tandem with the White House, the executive branch, to make sure we're cracking down on this. It should transcend partisan politics. My Democrat colleagues seem more concerned about stopping the people exposing the fraud than prosecuting the fraud itself. And you've seen in a state like California, for example, Gavin Newsom and California Democrats literally passed a bill to suppress the First Amendment rights of journalists who are investigating fraud. They don't want this to be covered up. You should be asking why. I think some of their pockets are being lined with all this. That's my theory about it. You go check that out. They're going to look anywhere but in the mirror, and it's outrageous. The American people take great care and pride in how we spend their money and how they spend their money. And they expect the same level of stewardship and integrity when it comes to how their taxpayer dollars are spent. So it's just a matter of basic common sense. While Democrats deny and deflect, Republicans are going to continue our work to rein in fraud and save American taxpayer dollars, and we'll continue to govern on the basis of common sense, as we always do. As Chairwoman McClain said a little while ago, the theme you'll hear over and over is common sense versus crazy, and Republicans are on the common sense side, and we're happy to talk about that anytime, anywhere. All right, a few questions? Front row.
Your colleague, Tom Kean from New Jersey, hasn't voted in 3 months. He hasn't been seen in 3 months. He says he is dealing with a personal medical issue and has repeatedly said he'll return soon. How is it acceptable that a member of Congress can be missing without explaining to constituents what exactly is going on? Does he need to be more forthcoming, and how is that acceptable?
I talked to Tom a couple of days ago, maybe Friday or Saturday. He's in good spirits, but as his public statement that went out yesterday explained, he's dealing with a health issue. He's under the care of healthcare providers, and they've told him he needs a little bit longer to recover. Now, that's all I can say. That's all he said. It's not a scandalous thing at all. People deal with health issues. Maybe that's a news flash for you, but even members of Congress get sick as well, right? He's dealing with that right now. Tom Kean is an extraordinary member of Congress. He has delivered for the people of New Jersey. He ran without opposition in the primary yesterday, and he deserved to because he has been a phenomenal member of Congress and a great member of our team here. He comes from a long legacy of public service in his family, as you know. He's a famous family. He is going to be back. He'll be back. He's working remotely right now, as he explained in his statement yesterday, and he's anxious to come back in person and be here voting every single day. So I'm going to let him address the rest of it. People are entitled to get sick. You know, this happens. And that's the most we can say about it. He's going to give full transparency and full explanation when he gets back, and I'm encouraging him to do that.
Jonathan, do you think that Bill Pulte is qualified to be the acting director of national intelligence, and do you think you can still pass a bipartisan FISA deal given some of the Democratic pushback?
So here's the thing. The president obviously has the prerogative and the choice on who he appoints to these positions, and this would be an interim appointment. What I'll tell you about, I'm glad you brought up FISA, because I think what's absolutely outrageous about this whole thing is that Democrats in the Senate, and I guess in the House as well, are now suggesting that they would allow FISA, they would withhold their votes on FISA's reauthorization, which expires next week. The statute will expire, as you know. They withhold their votes because of an interim appointment that is the president's choice to do. That is absolutely outrageous. Every one of you should be following them around with microphones and challenging them on that, because FISA Section 702 is responsible for approximately two-thirds of the President of the United States' daily national security briefing comes from the collection of intelligence through this statute. We enacted it in Congress after 9/11. The reason we haven't had another 9/11 on our shores is because we have this critically important national security tool. It is the most important intelligence tool that we have. The idea that they would try to play politics right now because they don't like the president's choice of an appointment is absolutely stunning to me. But it shows to you one more time, as we say here weekly, this is not your father's Democrat Party. These are not reasonable leaders over here, okay? They will use pain for the American people for political purposes. And this is the latest example of it. I think it's absolutely outrageous.
President Trump last week, when talking about Iran, said that he doesn't care about the midterms, and he does have these numerous building projects around D.C. He's very focused on foreign policy. Voters are concerned about cost of living, which most above all. Do you feel like the president is focused enough on the midterms?
Absolutely. I spent 3 hours with the president in the Oval Office on Monday. The vice president was there, Secretary of State was there, JD and Marco and I and the president. We talked about domestic policy almost the entire time. There's a lot going on in the world, but the president has his hands at the wheel. When he made the comment about the midterms, obviously you all saw, I'm sure you all saw the context. That has not been fully reported. They were asking him about Iran and negotiations for peace in that situation. And they asked him if the midterms is the controlling factor of that. He said it's not. It should not be. He's the commander-in-chief. He's trying to prevent the largest sponsor of state terrorism from having a nuclear weapon that would take out Israel and potentially us. It would go after our allies and friends and Americans. Remember, this country in Iran declared war on us 47 years ago. They chant death to America, okay? The president is trying to keep the people safe. The first responsibility of the commander-in-chief is to keep the country safe. He has done that. He's demonstrated it every day. Speaking of domestic policy, we got that border secured. In the previous 4 years, we had a totally, we had I would say a corrupt administration in this sense that they allowed the border to be open and allowed dangerous criminal illegal aliens to come into the country and do untold harm on us. They had fentanyl flowing over the border, killing hundreds, thousands of Americans. The president got on that and he stopped it. And he is dialed in every single day on the cost of living, on domestic affairs, on the price of gasoline, on the things that are burdening hardworking American families. We're pushing legislation to solve it. He's used his executive authority to solve these problems, and we are working on that final piece, which is to get peace in the Strait of Hormuz, to get commerce reopened there. We're calling on all of our all of us, calling on our allied nations and friends, the Arab states in the region and NATO partners and everyone else. The entire world has an interest in the Strait of Hormuz being reopened for commerce. That's what he's working on. So what he said there has been taken out of context, and it's so unfair. This president is more laser focused and more dialed in on domestic issues here in the homeland than any president in memory. He spends more time working on domestic issues in one day than Joe Biden did in 4. That is an objective fact. This president's dialed in. He talks to y'all constantly all day long. As I was in the Oval Office with him for 3 hours, he took individual calls from individual reporters. Have you ever known of a president of the United States to take calls on his cell phone from individual reporters? No. This is the most transparent president in history. He cares about America. He's pushing the America First agenda because that is his responsibility, and we're on it like white on rice. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Just to clarify from Peyton's question, do you know what the health concern is for Congressman Kane? And then second, Representative Ogles on his Twitter or X account posted, you know what I'm talking about, the homosexuality has no place in America, and he took that down and said his staffer posted it. I wonder what your response is to that statement.
First on Tom Kane, I do know what his health issue is, but he's asked me not to disclose that, and I'm going to honor that. I mean, I should do that. It's my job. I would do the same for anyone. I've also told him that there is nothing untoward or scandalous at all in having a health issue, and as soon as he's ready to talk about that, you're all going to breathe a sigh of relief and say that makes sense. What he's dealing with is something very common and not a big thing. We don't do proxy voting in Congress. And he's not been able to be here because he's treating his illness. But when he explains it, it'll all make sense, and there's nothing untoward about it at all. What was untoward is the post yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to talk to Rep. Ogles yet. But Andy's a good guy, and his tweet explained that. They pulled it down. He explained that some errant staffer did that. I'll tell you what my worldview is. I mean, y'all, I'm pretty clear on this, and y'all understand. I believe the Bible is unequivocal. We're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves, everybody. We're supposed to treat every single person with dignity and respect, whether we agree with them or not. It's a Christian virtue. It's a biblical virtue. It's also an American virtue. It's part of who we are. Out of many, one. We're a melting pot. Okay, so we can advocate for policies and disagree with our colleagues or anyone else, but still treat them with dignity and respect. That's an obvious thing. We want every member here to walk in the dignity of their office, Republican, Democrat, Independent, or otherwise. And we're always consistent about that. That's my statement on it. There's nothing more to say. Andy took it down and did it publicly. So he should have done that. It was the right response. Jake.
First of all, I don't think he said it's interim. It's an acting role, but he's not said that he's going to appoint somebody. So I don't think.
Well, acting is interim by definition, right? Okay, yeah.
Let's if Democrats are not going to, they say they don't trust. They said they didn't trust Gabbard, and they said they don't trust Bolton. Could you pass FISA without Democrats?
The Democrats wouldn't trust Jesus. They're not good. There's not a single person. He hasn't been nominated.
Wouldn't trust him.
I mean, how do you handle this if you can't have Democratic votes?
They're playing political games, Jake. The Democrats are not willing to do anything, even the most simple, basic, important responsibility to keep the American people safe, because they want to make life hard for the president. You know, TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. I don't know how else to explain that. I don't think, I can't think of a single person that they would willingly go along with right now. That's where they are. And so it is a constitutional crisis, really, in one sense, because when you have a party whose sole objective every day is to stop the president, wreck the administration, make his life miserable, not go along with any of his appointments or any of his agenda, it creates a real crisis for the American people. We got to get past that. So, I mean, I'm calling on Democrat colleagues, put the politics aside. For the sake of FISA reauthorization, if nothing else, this is the statute that keeps Americans safe. And if we want to prevent terrorist attacks in a homeland, we cannot allow that to go dark. Republicans are ready to put this into action, but we have to have 60 votes in the Senate. They're going to have to put that stuff aside and allow the president to do his job. Thank you. Thanks.